I have really liked a majority of the Mission Impossible franchise up until this point. The ones that everybody loved, like Ghost Protocol, Rogue Nation, Fallout, I also really like those. That's not an original take on the internet. But those three films in particular really elevated this franchise to a whole new level over the past decade. Because Tom Cruise and his team have assembled some of the most insane stunts ever put to screen. And it is undeniable that there are very few people in the industry willing to put in the work that this entire cast and crew have been doing for the past 15 years. But to give you my thoughts on this franchise as a whole, I really enjoyed the first Mission Impossible, and I remember enjoying the third one, but I don't really remember much of it at this point. Besides Philip Seymour Hoffman and the rabbit's foot in the opening, everything else in the movie, I couldn't tell you what happens. I can never get behind the people that really love Mission Impossible 2. I'm glad you guys love it. Not for me. And then Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, which it used to be called, which was really Mission Impossible 7, was the last one to come out before this new one. And a lot of people really love that movie. They think it's great. It's one of the best in the franchise. I thought it was okay. Even though there was some CGI used in Mission Impossibles 4, 5, and 6, it felt pretty minimal to all the real actual stunts that were happening on screen. And then for 7, they just kind of used it in a bunch of areas that I didn't really like as much. Like the whole train sequence, I really didn't vibe with at all. It just felt too fake to me. And then even though the jump with the motorcycle is cool, the CGI on the cliff looked a little weird, and then it just wasn't as exciting as a lot of the other stunts in the previous 3 movies for me personally. So going into Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning, which is apparently the 8th and final of this franchise, at least with Tom Cruise at the helm of it, I was definitely more excited than I was nervous, just because even though I didn't love Dead Reckoning, I love Tom Cruise and what him and Christopher McQuarrie have done with this franchise over the past few years. And this entire team is just really good at making movies that are worth seeing in theaters. Not everybody in Hollywood is doing that these days, and that kind of energy is just so infectious, and it really makes me want to love every single movie that these guys put out. It's just the passion that they actually have for this stuff really comes through in terms of the behind the scenes stuff and a lot of the set pieces you do see on screen. I really wanted to walk out of that theater and be like, man, movies are just so back. But at the end of the day, when I walked out of that theater, it gave me a take that I will probably never have again. And that is that Mission Impossible 8 is a bad movie that is absolutely worth paying $25 to see it on the biggest IMAX screen you possibly can if you still have the opportunity to do so. And I have to go in depth with this movie to talk about all of my points. So let's start with the negatives first and why I do think this is, at the end of the day, a pretty bad movie. And I think a lot of that has to do with the first 90 minutes of the movie, which is just so painful for 2 major reasons. It's kind of a mixture of 2 main problems I have with this movie. And the first is the amount of callbacks this film has to all of the other movies that have come before it in the franchise. When a film makes a reference to previous entries, it's not like it's always annoying. Like, it's kind of necessary in certain points. But when it feels like the story of the new movie is making zero progress and the film feels like 45 minutes have passed already and nothing important has happened. Like, there is one scene where I'm like, okay, like, yeah, that changes the characters of this franchise. But besides that moment, there's like nothing that happens that's interesting. And even that one moment that does have an impact on the franchise, like, I don't know, in my head, something that is so important to this character and this group of characters to just kind of end like that wasn't satisfying for me. And it's just on top of a bunch of montages of the old Mission Impossible movies. I went to meet my girlfriend at the theater for this movie and she was running late. Long story short, she shows up 20-ish minutes into the movie and she's like, what'd I miss? And I said, absolutely nothing. To compare it to something else, imagine you went to see Harry Potter Deathly Hallows Part 2, which is another finale to a franchise that is an 8th entry in terms of the movies. And that movie is like 2-ish hours, I want to say, maybe 2 hours, 15 minutes. So imagine taking that current film and adding about 45 minutes to an hour of montages of the old Harry Potter movies in the beginning of it. Everyone would hate that because at the end of the day, this is the finale to the franchise. But we also have to remember this is Dead Reckoning Part 2. Like, Dead Reckoning Part 1 was called Part 1 for a long time until they decided to change the name of that one to just Dead Reckoning, and this one is The Final Reckoning. And when you combine those two things, not only do you have montages of the first 7 movies to commemorate celebrate this entire franchise, you also have to remind the audience of what happened in part one, which in my opinion, you don't have to do that. And if you are going to do it, it's usually something that can be summed up within the first 2 minutes of the movie. I don't always love that stylistic choice when splitting two movies into two parts, but the way they handle it here, it's just like, why are we spending so much time about the first 7 movies in the 8th movie? Let's just start the 8th movie. And in the end, I just feel cheated out of a great Mission Impossible movie. Like, I really do think 7 and 8 should have cut all of the fat, became one 3-hour epic last Mission Impossible movie that included all of the stunts from 7 and 8 combined, and you would have had probably the ultimate Mission Impossible movie. So that's my first major issue with the film, and specifically the first 90 minutes or so. The second major issue I have with it is that nothing of any level of excitement happens until the underwater sequence. And I'm not one of those people that needs an action scene every 15 seconds, and if I'm not getting an action scene, I need someone farting in Ant-Man 3. I don't need brain rot in my movies, I promise. But I do think a lot of the previous entries in this franchise, specifically Rogue Nation and Fallout, kind of set the standard of how to pace a good Mission Impossible movie. And the structure of those movies kind of strategically places different action set pieces in the beginning, middle, end, and just feels like you're being entertained the entire time. Like Rogue Nation opens with Tom Cruise hanging off that plane. That is the opening sequence of the movie, and when they were advertising it, I thought it was going to be the big set piece, and you could argue it still is of that movie, but Rogue Nation still has the opera scene. It has that underwater scene that I think is really exciting. That's mostly one take, I believe. Then you have the motorcycle chase after that. Like, there is a lot of good sequences throughout that movie. But again, since the entire story of Dead Reckoning and Final Reckoning is split into 2 movies, you are forced to pay, like if they had planned all of these action sequences, right? And they put them all on a board, and this was meant to be one movie, and then eventually they made it 2 movies. You have a major pacing issue now because you have to end the first movie on a big set piece like the train. And then it feels like the beginning of part 2 is just a bunch of filler until the last 2 sequences of the movie happen. And I don't really think this would be an issue if I was just glued to the screen the first 90 minutes. Like if every conversation was super interesting, super tension filled, and I really felt like we were building to something crazy, maybe I would feel differently about it. Not maybe, I would feel differently about this. But the problem is nothing of excitement of anything happens. Not just action scenes, but just no interesting dialogue, no exciting moments of any kind, no build up to anything. And I think the reason I feel this way is because Christopher McQuarrie and Cruise have just been on such a great streak recently with making entertaining movies from start to finish. And I do think this one drops the ball in that department. But you come to these movies for the major action sequences, and The Final Reckoning really only has 2 major ones. The first being the entire underwater sequence that was in a lot of the promotion. It's pretty much like a heist scene in a submarine, and a lot of people have been praising it, saying it's incredible. And this is where I differ from a lot of people. I thought it was just okay. Like it is exciting, especially when you compare it to everything in the movie that comes before it because it's so damn boring. But I think when you paint the standard of this franchise, you can't help but compare it to a lot of other movies within the franchise. And I just don't think the submarine sequence lives up to a lot of the other scenes that they have done so far, especially from Mission Impossible 4 on. And I know Tom Cruise was actually in a suit that he couldn't stay in longer than 10 minutes or he would pass out or something like that. The whole thing is technically impressive. I'm not denying that. I just think if we were making a countdown of the top 5 Mission Impossible action scenes, I don't think this comes close to the top 5. It might make like the number 10 spot for me, but it's nowhere close. And I think if you're making an almost 3-hour Mission Impossible movie with only 2 major set pieces, both of them have to be in that top 5 conversation for me. And I just don't think the submarine one is on that level. However, this is the reason you spend $25 to find the biggest IMAX screen you possibly can, because in no way can I deny how incredible the other action sequence is. For those of you that don't know, this is the airplane sequence that has been promoted in all of the trailers, all of the marketing, and it is, I don't even know how to talk about this because it always bothers me when I read or listen to a review where they're like, oh my God, this was one of the best things I have ever seen. It's like, guy, you say that 8 times a year and you've been saying that for 8 years in a row. At some point, you got to pick and choose what's the best. And I'm guilty of doing stuff like that too, don't get me wrong. But let's be clear here. This sequence made my jaw hit the floor multiple times. And this entire movie is kind of like waiting 3 hours for the best ride at the theme park. It's a long line. You ask yourself multiple times, should I step out of line? Is this really going to be worth 3 hours of waiting? And sometimes the ride can be worth the wait. Like if you've done the Pandora ride at Disney World, you have no denial that that thing is the most incredible thing you'll ever see. And when it comes to movies delivering on that ride experience, for me, the motorcycle jump in Mission Impossible 7 did not deliver on that. But if the ride that you've waited almost 3 hours for is worth it, when you go home from that trip, you're not talking about the 3 hour wait. You're talking about the ride and how it was the most amazing thing you did your entire vacation. And for me, the ride of Mission Impossible 8 was 100% worth the wait, because this is the best action sequence McQuarrie, Tom Cruise, either of them have probably ever worked on. I never want to sit through the first 2 hours and 20 minutes of this movie ever again, but I considered doing it just so I could see this sequence on a big screen one more time. I didn't end up doing it. Don't got a lot of time right now, but it was a thought for a little bit. It is one of the most unbelievable things I have seen in my entire life. And the fact that Tom Cruise is actually up there doing all these stunts for real in real time, it is something to admire. And the entire sequence, like when you compare it to a lot of the other Mission Impossible stunts, even though I like pretty much all of the stunts that they do, a lot of them, even though they are really good, they're kind of over within a minute or two. Not the case with this one. I don't know how long the sequence actually is because they're cutting back and forth with two other groups of characters doing other tasks, but it is a long time that they are in the air, and every single second of it is so crazy to watch. And I think it's a crime that the Academy is just now introducing the best stunts category, which isn't going to show up for a few more years at the Oscars, because Tom Cruise should have like 8 of those by now. And the fact that he's not going to have the chance to win one for this movie, for his best stunt probably ever, is kind of a crime against all of his stunt filmmaking. I'm sure he will get one eventually. I'm sure he will do one more crazy thing. But for me, it's hard to see how you top this. And when it comes to Tom Cruise, what could I possibly say that hasn't been said by everyone on the internet and everyone in real life by this point? Like, I literally heard somebody leaving the theater and say, man, you ever think about how Tom Cruise is the last real movie star? And it's like, yeah, man, I have. I heard it 200 times in the past week. But I'll be the 201st person to say it, because this guy and his dedication to action filmmaking and just any kind of filmmaking is just something to admire. And it's pretty unmatched when you compare it to everybody else working in the industry right now. I mean, this guy jumped out of a plane, lit his parachute on fire, and continued free falling like 16 different times they did that. He's clinically insane. You think Ryan Reynolds is doing something remotely close to that? Zero fucking shot. I love Tom Cruise's dedication. I hope he keeps doing stuff like this until he's 157 years old. Because let's be real, I don't know a lot of 62-year-old men that would absolutely beg for the chance to have a shirtless action scene in a movie. I know a lot of them have no problem taking their shirts off at the sauna at LA Fitness, but man, none of them look like Tom Cruise. This guy is killing it. But at the end of the day, my love for a performer and their dedication to the craft and one of the best action sequences I've ever seen can only get me so far. I know it carries it for a lot of people, but for me, I also need a good movie with that, and The Final Reckoning is not one of them. A lot of people in the streets think my taste is pretentious, but a lot of those people are also going to say I have no taste when I say that Top Gun Maverick is still probably my favorite movie of the entire decade. And that's coming from a guy that didn't even like the first Top Gun that much. But even if you have a very basic story, it still has the chance of being one of the best movies of all time if you fill it with amazing characters, insane action filmmaking, high stakes, nail-biting tension, a few solid jokes, and a One Republic song that is actually good. That's all you need. And even though I've enjoyed a lot of the characters in these Mission Impossible movies over the last few years, I just don't feel anything when I watch this movie. There's nothing in here that captivated me until like the hour and 45-minute mark. And for me, that's hard to recommend to just anybody on the street. I can't recommend it in good faith. It will bore a lot of people for a long time. But yet, I could still recommend buying the ticket. You know, maybe buy an IMAX ticket, find a restaurant by the movie theater, go on a date, get an appetizer, and then around like 90 minutes into the runtime, you pay the bill, you get in the theater, you watch one of the best action sequences you have ever seen. And you'll even have time to catch the slightly okay one that's underwater. You'll get to experience both of them at least. It's still one of the most disappointing finales to a franchise in recent memory for me, but even when Tom Cruise and Christopher McQuarrie McQuarrie disappoint you, they still give you one of the best action sequences of the entire decade, probably the best action sequence of the franchise. And to me, that's kind of a fair enough trade. So this is Chase. Thank you so much for watching as always. I hope you have an awesome day. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of my future Scientology vlogs.